Thank you for the great introduction. My name is Mike Banks. I am the Vice President of the Electric Vehicle Council of Ottawa. And today's talk, I'm going to be introducing you guys to electric vehicles. And I'm going to debunk some myths that are out there. There's more than 10 myths out in the wild, but I've picked the top 10 to sort of deal with today. Next slide, please. So who is EVCO? Who are we? We are a small not-for-profit organization from Ottawa, hence the name. And we are volunteer run. Our group started in 1982. We originally started as a group that converted gas cars to electric. And so it was mostly very technically minded, old dudes mostly, who would buy a used gas car, like a Beetle, and they would convert it over to electric. And it was very technical, and you needed to know a lot of mechanical stuff and engineering and all that. And our group was sort of focused as a help group for people who were doing that for about 20, 30 years of its existence. But ever since around 2010, you've been able to buy electric cars. Just go out and buy one. And so we pivoted our group. So we do less in the conversion space and more in the outreach space, where we do talks like this and we promote electric cars because they are better. We do test drives, and our mission is to decarbonize transportation as quickly as we can. So why do I do this? I do this because I have kids, and I used to think that we inherited the earth from our parents, and we sort of do in a way, but what we're really doing is we're borrowing it from our children. And I want to leave my kids a better planet than what I inherited from my parents. And the best way to do that is for me to volunteer and to do public outreach things and try and convince as many people as possible to make the switch as quickly as possible. So the world has never actually been a sustainable place. Even indigenous cultures, they've been sustainable in their little area, but as a whole, humanity is not the best for the planet. The planet would do a lot better if we weren't on it. However, I'm not advocating that we get rid of humans, because I'm a human and I like living. So what we're facing is the first opportunity in human history to become a truly globally sustainable civilization. We have the technology, and I'll go through some of that in this presentation, but we can be the first humans on Earth to be truly sustainable for the planet going forward, which is a pretty incredible opportunity, and I think we should take it. Next slide, please. And why is that important? So you might recognize this graph. It's gotten a lot worse in recent years. This was first introduced by Al Gore in An Inconvenient Truth around 2012-ish, 2010. We've added a few more years onto the end, which have fallen off the slide here, but it's gotten hotter. The hottest 12 months in the past 200,000 odd years have been the last 12 months. So we are living in increasingly hot times, and it's going to get worse. The coldest, so we've had a very warm May, a very warm winter. This will be the coldest May for the rest of your life, right? This was the coldest winter for the rest of your life. And so those are pretty confronting numbers, right? And the reason the Earth is warming, scientifically proven, right? There's no debate anymore. It's because of anthropogenic climate change, right? We have been burning fossil fuels. All of us have been burning fossil fuels for our entire lives, and it's finally catching up to us. And yeah, that's the world we're going to live in. So we need to stop burning stuff as quickly as possible. And I'm going to talk about how to do that. So it's not like this is doom and gloom, and this is a little, I was asked earlier if we wanted a box of tissues, and it's like, well, I'm going to talk about some dark things here. So climate change is real, it's here, it's happening, and we need to do something about it. So if we go to the next slide, please. Fossil fuels are clearly the issue, right? We've been burning way too many of them for far too long. So how do we stop that? Well, this is just for Canada, right? It's emissions by sector. And you'll see transportation is 22%, right? Oil and gas is 28%. Right? Transportation uses oil and gas to do its thing. So if we green transportation, that takes off 22% right there. Like if we stop burning fossil fuels as part of moving around, that does a big thing. We can do buildings as another 13. So that's replacing your gas furnace with a heat pump, something like that. Your gas hot water tank with an electric one or a hybrid one. So there's a lot of things we can do to reduce the emissions in our daily lives that will help, right? And the more we stop burning fossil fuels as consumers, the less the oil and gas industry will pollute, because they won't need to pump as much or dig it out of the ground in Alberta. So there's a few ways of doing that. If we go to the next slide. The first way, the easiest way, is to walk, bike, use public transportation. That's an electric bus there. So EVCO, one of the things we've done is we've convinced the city of Ottawa to stop buying diesel buses from now on. So from now on, every bus they buy will be electric. It'll be battery electric. They have 4 in the fleet right now. They're getting 80 odd more this year, and then a couple hundred next year, and it's going to ramp up from there until the whole fleet is replaced middle of next decade. So walk, bike, use public transportation. That's the lowest carbon footprint that you can do as an individual to move around the city. But if you don't need a car, don't buy a car. Like, we are the Electric Vehicle Council, so if you have a car, like we have thoughts on that. But if you don't need a car, we're not saying go out and buy a car, right? We're not promoting cars as a thing that you should do. We're promoting something else. So if you don't need a car, don't buy a car. If you kind of need a car, but not all the time, there are car share programs like Commune Auto that will let you share a car among many owners. So it's sort of like a rental thing where you sign up to Commune Auto, and there's cars in your area, and you can go pick one up when you need it and drop it off a few days later, or whatever you need to do. You can take it for as long as you need or as little as you need. So if you only go to IKEA like once a month or once a quarter, I go once a month because I have kids. Then you get the Commune Auto car for that day, so you can bring back the PAX bookshelf and then, or the Billy bookshelves, and then you're back to biking or walking or whatever. But if you must have a car, this is where our thoughts come in. It should be electric, not gas. And I'll talk about that in a second. The impact of electrification can be pretty big, right? So I have a nice little Greenpeace thing, except I have issue with this little cartoon there where it's one guy on the oil side pulling. It's more like the numbers should be reversed. There should be like 20 people on the oil side pulling and then one lone clean energy person pulling in the opposite direction. But it is what it is. But what you see on this chart is as we electrify the fleet, gasoline demand displaced increases, right? And that's what we want to see. We want to reduce the amount of gasoline that everyone's burning, or diesel. And our point here is that the technology exists, it's available, it's readily available, and it's good to go right now. Grids, as they get cleaner, electric cars get cleaner. As oil industry gets cleaner, your gas car still burns gas, so it still is dirty. So it doesn't, the benefits of switching to EV get compounded as the rest of the puzzle gets cleaner as going forward. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about some technologies. I'm sure all of you have heard about some of these technologies. And we get a lot of questions about these other technologies. Why are you pushing electric cars? Why not this other thing, right? So we'll talk about that. Conventional hybrids, thank you. 25 years ago, when I was back in high school, so this gives you a hint of how old I am, hybrids were the thing, right? All the Hollywood stars, if they had any green about them, they bought a Prius, right? They were for the environmentally conscious eco-warrior. You had a Prius, right? It's a hybrid. But things have changed quite a bit in the last quarter century, including the fact that I have a sore back now. Hybrids have a lot of drawbacks. They have all the same drawbacks as a gas car, and then a few other ones, a few additional ones. They use older, heavier batteries, even to this day. Toyota hybrids still use nickel metal hydride batteries, which are like the ancient batteries they used to use in like your Walkman back in the 80s. Same technology, and so those chemistries are not very, they're heavier, they're less energy dense, they tend to fail, they're not the best chemistry that we have nowadays. Nowadays, most EVs, or all of them, use lithium ion, which is a newer, better technology. But hybrids still rely on the old nickel metal hydride for the most part. They do save you some fuel, but that's only really if you live in a city. If you're living in the country and driving on the highway a lot, you're not going to save any gas with a hybrid. They save it mostly in stop-and-go traffic. So if you're not the kind of person that commutes and sits in stop-and-go traffic on the Queensway, then you're going to see very little benefit from your hybrid. They have all the same maintenance issues as a gas car, right? They still have a gas engine. All of their energy comes from gasoline, right? Even the hybrid battery's energy comes from gasoline, right? It comes from burning the engine and slowing down and stopping and all that. So they have all the oil changes and the timing belts and the cylinder head gaskets and the exhaust systems and all that stuff. Hybrids still have all that. Like I said, you won't probably save any gas, and they do cost a bit more than the gas equivalent. So you'll probably most likely not make up that difference in price through the life of the vehicle. And I have this self-charging hybrid quote in there, and that's from Toyota. That was part of their marketing. They're pushing the self-charging hybrid because they're trying to promote hybrids instead of an EV. But there's no such thing as a self-charging hybrid. That's not a real thing. Hybrids are just gas cars with extra complexity. Next slide. There is a kind of hybrid that is better than a normal hybrid. It's called a plug-in hybrid, right? It has a plug, hence the name. And there's some pros and cons to it. So a plug-in hybrid is good if you do short trips. Like most Canadians drive less than 50 kilometers a day. And pretty much all plug-in hybrids can handle that on battery only, assuming you plug it in. You're able to refill at home like an EV. You can plug it in at your house. You get an EV charger. It's the same exact charger, same exact plug, right? You just plug in your car. And if you go on a long trip, there's a gas engine that'll kick in and that'll run. So I like to think of plug-in hybrids as a bit of a gateway drug to EVs because it gets you in the habit of plugging in your car. And then if you're really hesitant about making the switch to electric, which I don't think you will be after this talk, but if you are, you'll still have the comfort of the gas station, if you will. But plug-in hybrids are also a good option for things like minivans and Jeeps that don't yet have a battery electric version. So if you're really into off-roading, then your only option right now is a plug-in hybrid Jeep, which is great. A lot of people love them. The cons, they still have a gas engine, so you still have the oil changes and all that hassle that comes with owning a gas car. You only benefit if you actually plug it in. There's been a lot of data out there. A lot of fleets bought plug-in hybrids and then nobody plugs them in, so they're basically just running as hybrids and they're carrying around this huge battery for no reason. In that case, they're not very beneficial, but if you plug it in, you're actually going to save a lot of money. They're not less expensive than an EV, typically. So if it's between a plug-in hybrid and EV, definitely get the EV. An EV is electric vehicle, if I didn't make that clear earlier. And the other thing with plug-in hybrids is that the engine tends to run a lot in the winter, and that's because, and I'll get to this in the efficiency part, gas engines are really good at making heat. So they tend to optimize the plug-in hybrid to burn gas to make heat. And it's also very hard on the plug-in hybrid battery. So yes, it is a lithium-ion battery in the plug-in hybrids, but the use case is basically you charge it up to 100 and then you run it down to 0 every single day. There's a lot of cycles on that battery, far more than what you would have in a typical electric car. So the batteries get used hard, which is fine. They're warranted for 8 years, 160,000 kilometers, but it's still hard on the battery and the powertrain. So that's plug-in hybrids. They're not a bad option. I will talk about a bad option though, hydrogen. So they've been promising hydrogen cars since I was in elementary school, like grade 7. I remember them talking about, I was like really keen on Ballard Power. We had this like economics course where we got to buy stock and I'm like, the future's hydrogen. And so I bought all this like imaginary Ballard Power stock and it went nowhere. Now I understand why. So they're very expensive to purchase and operate. The hydrogen is so expensive in the operation of the car that most of the time when you lease the hybrid car or the hydrogen car from Toyota or Hyundai, they give you free fuel for like 10 years because it's just so expensive to do hydrogen that they just like give it to you for free as part of the lease. It's crazy. They have extremely limited refueling infrastructure, so it's always funny to me. I get a little kick out of this when people come up to us and they're like, there's no EV charging infrastructure, hydrogen's the future. And I'm like, okay, where's the nearest hydrogen station? And it's in Vancouver. So yeah. They have some unsolved engineering challenges. They've been working on this for the better part of 50 years now, and they still haven't cracked some of these issues. Literally, the cracking of the fuel cell stack is one issue. They like physically break because they're like sheets of silicon or whatever, and so that's one issue that they haven't quite solved. The tanks, the hydrogen tanks inside the car, are very high pressure vessels. Like I'm a scuba diver. I have a scuba tank, and we pressurize those to like a couple hundred psi, right? Hydrogen tanks are pressurized to a couple thousand psi, right? So that usually they are carbon composite. They're like this crazy technical engineering thing, and they can't use metal because hydrogen makes metal brittle. So they have to be this fancy material, exotic materials like carbon fiber. And then they have to be replaced every 8 years because if you don't replace it, the car will explode, right? So that's a design issue. And then the other thing is frozen nozzles. So a lot of hydrogen cars are in California where people like to downplay the frozen nozzle issue. And what happens is you have super high pressure at the station, and then your car is a little bit lower pressure. And what happens with a gas when it goes from high pressure to lower pressure is it gets colder. And so you'll fill up the car, but then the nozzle, like the gas nozzle, will freeze to the car, right? And in California, that's okay because you just have to wait, right? Because it's always like 30 degrees in California. So it'll eventually thaw. In Canada, like, unless you don't plan on traveling in like 5 months of the year, you might have an issue, right? And you can't heat it up. Like you can't use like a flame to like warm it up or a heat source because then your car might explode again, right? So that's also a very bad thing. But then probably the most dubious thing is where the hydrogen actually comes from, right? Hydrogen, atomic hydrogen, the hydrogen we're talking about here, doesn't exist on Earth, right? It's super reactive, so it's bound itself to something a long time ago. Most of our hydrogen lives in water, but a lot of our hydrogen lives in something called hydrocarbons, which have a lot of hydrogen atoms, right? And so what we do to get hydrogen for these hydrogen fuel cell cars is we have to create the hydrogen using energy. And the easiest way to do that is to take a hydrocarbon and crack it apart. It's called steam reformation. And for every H2 you get 2 CO2s. So if climate change is your thing, making hydrogen is probably not the best idea because you're doubling the CO2. You're literally, they use fossil gas, natural gas. I call it fossil gas because it's greenwashing. It's literally more energy efficient to just burn methane, like natural gas, than it is to make hydrogen using the natural gas, right? There are some use cases for hydrogen industrially. Hydrogen's been in industry for 100 years. They've kind of perfected the processes they need to do that stuff. But as far as transportation goes, hydrogen's a non-starter. Next slide. And the reason it's a non-starter is because it's not efficient. So I like infographics because they show information very interestingly. So for an electric car, battery electric, say you start with some unit of electric generation, right? So you have 100% of the energy generated at the wind farm there in this case. It gets transported a little bit. So there's some losses on those high tension lines. There's a little bit of loss. It goes into the battery, right? The battery charges pretty efficiently. And then the battery can give up its energy at the end to make you move forward pretty efficiently as well. So overall, you're looking at losing maybe between 10 and 30% of the energy you started with to making you move forward. Hydrogen, on the other hand, say you take the exact same amount of input energy, right? Same exact wind turbine. Well, first of all, you want to make it cleanly. You don't want to use methane, right? So you use electrolysis, which is liberating it from water. So you zap some water, and then you get some hydrogen out of the water. So you get 2 O2s, or you get one O and 2 H2, like H2 and O, and then they combine. So you get hydrogen and oxygen out of the byproducts, right? You compress the hydrogen, you let the oxygen just go away, because whatever, we breathe that, so that's helpful. But that takes energy. Then you got to transfer it, because now you have this liquid, cryogenically stored liquid, high-pressure substance, right, in a tank. So it's a physical thing, so you got to move it to where you want it, because you're not going to make the hydrogen in your garage, because your house might explode. So you want to make that somewhere off-site, away from people. So you have this liquid that you're making, somewhere in the outskirts, and you got to transport it to the fuel station. So that's a thing that takes energy. Then you got to put it into tanks and fill up your car with it. And then once it's in your car, you want to make electricity because the motors of hydrogen cars are still electric motors, right? So you convert it back into electricity to make electricity. And then sometimes it gets stored in a little battery in the hydrogen cars because hydrogen cars need a battery because the way the fuel cell works is it can provide a constant flow of energy, but it can't do peaks. Right? It's not good at providing instant power, right? It can do a little bit of power all the time. So if you want to accelerate, you need a little battery to sort of store up some energy so you can give it a squirt when you want to go. And then goes the engine. So your overall efficiency after all of those steps is between 25 and 35%. So what this means is that if you want to switch the entire car fleet to hydrogen, you're going to need 4 times more electricity generation than if you just went to battery electric. Right? Next slide, please. And so battery electric's more efficient. It's even more efficient than gasoline, right? Which to me was a bit mind-blowing. So one way to look at this is gasoline, right? You got 100% of your energy. Gasoline's very energy dense. It's a magical liquid, right? It's got a lot of energy and a little bit of volume. It's great stuff. but we're not really great at extracting that energy. So in a gas car, you're only using about 25% of the energy in a tank of gas to actually move the car. The rest of that energy we just throw away, right? It's waste heat, it's friction, it's all this other stuff. It just gets thrown away. So one fun way of looking at that is for every dollar you spend on gasoline, you're throwing away 75 cents. You just throw it away. You don't need it anymore. Which is not a great way of using money or resources if you're throwing away 3/4 of everything you'd use, right? So that's not great. Whereas with an EV, your loss is, like I said earlier, right, 10 to 30% at worst. So most of the energy you spend on filling up your EV, you get to use to make your EV go somewhere, which is great. The nice thing about the gasoline is that because all of that is waste heat, that is why plug-in hybrids use the gas engine to make heat in the winter, is because you're throwing it away anyway. You may as well do something with it, right? So they have a gas engine in the plug-in hybrid, might as well make it heat, right? But yeah, so what this means to you is that you will save money if you drive electric. You'll save quite a bit of money, probably a couple grand a year, depending on how much you drive. And that, I've definitely experienced these numbers. I used to spend around $2,500 a year on gas when I had a Golf, a Volkswagen Golf, and now I spend about $500, right? So I'm saving a couple grand a year just on the energy alone. And there's some other stuff, other benefits to EVs I'll get into in a bit. But right there, the energy efficiency, right? And so when people talk about, oh, well, we can't replace all of our energy, like all of the fossil fuels we dig up and use on Earth, we have to replace all that energy, right, somehow. Well, we don't. We only have to replace 1/4 of it, because most of the fossil fuels that we dig up, we throw away 3/4 of that as heat, right? That the same is true for cars. It's true for power plants. It's true for your house. With methane, you're getting about a decent amount of a high efficiency methane furnace will do about 90% efficiency, so that's pretty good. But an electric heat pump is 300 to 500% efficient, right? So you're still wasting energy using fossil fuels. Next slide, please. And one of the ways EVs save you energy, and one of the ways they're so efficient, is something you might hear about when you talk to electric vehicle people. It's called regenerative braking. What is that? Regen braking is something that only electric motors can do, right? So in your gas car, when you hit the brakes, you're literally making heat. Like, that's how you stop, is your friction on the brakes between the calipers and the disc, or drum if you're driving a Volkswagen. And that friction creates heat, and that slows you down, right? So it's the friction that slows you down. So you're just throwing that energy away. With an electric car, as the little cool graphic I found shows, an electric motor is the exact same device as an electric generator. It just depends on which way you're putting the energy in, right? So in motor mode, you're putting electricity in and getting rotational energy out, right? Mechanical energy. But if you're already rotating, you can harvest that rotational energy and convert it back into electricity using the exact same piece of equipment, right? And so that's what regen braking is. You can harvest the energy from accelerating and like driving at highway speeds and put that all back in the battery as electricity to use later. That's kind of the principle that hybrids use. That's how they charge up their little tiny battery in the hybrid. But with an EV, it goes a lot further, right? It's a lot better because you're not using gas to accelerate, you're using electricity. It's not perfect. There's still losses, right? We live on Earth. The laws of thermodynamics still apply. So there's no free lunch. You're still gonna, it's not like you're gonna accelerate to 100 and then slam on the brakes and come down to 0 and have the exact same amount of batteries when you started, right? That's not a thing. But it's better than nothing, right? Next slide. Other advantages. So you can use an electric car as a backup power source. That's what's happening in the picture there. That's my car. And a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, a few weeks ago, like anniversary was for the derecho, right? So this was during the derecho. We lost power for a week at my house. So I was like, hey, I have an electric car. It's sitting in the driveway. We're not going anywhere. Might as well run the fridges and lights and Wi-Fi. And the kids were happy because we had internet. For a full week, it only used 10% of my battery because EV batteries are huge. So my car was sitting in the driveway, off and locked, had the extension cord running up through the window, and that ran our fridges and everything, kept our food cold, kept the lights on, kept the internet going. That was great. That's something only EVs can do. My neighbor was going to fire up his pickup truck to like run it to make electricity for his fridge, and I'm like, no, I'm going to run extension cord across the street because I don't want to listen to your Ram sitting in the driveway idling for the full week. So that's what we did. I have another plug in the car, so he just ran an extension cord to his house because I'm like, I'm not listening to that stupid truck running all week. So there you go. Quiet and smooth, right? EVs are very quiet to drive, very smooth, and if you go on a test drive outside today, you'll experience that for yourself. Instant fast acceleration at any speed. So there's no gears in an EV. It's a one-gear car. And you don't need gears because the torque on the electric motors, you have maximum torque at no RPM. So you can accelerate anytime you want at any speed, and you'll go like crazy. Great. You can idle them forever, right? So that's what my car was essentially doing for a week in the driveway, was idling technically. You can idle them for as long as you want. Nobody cares. It's, as far as anyone's concerned, it's off, right? You can wake up to a full tank every single day, right? If you charge at home, you wake up to a full tank. And most EVs have the same range as a gas tank, right? A tank of gas will get you about 500 kilometers. Most EVs now do 500 kilometers to a charge. So you can wake up with a 500 kilometer range every single day. Are you going to drive 500 kilometers that day? Probably not, but you can if you want. They're cheap to fill up. So this is the cost if you're on tiered or like normal, time of use pricing. I switched to ultra low overnight, and so now my car costs me $2. It's actually $1.87 to fully charge overnight for 500 kilometers of range. So I defy anybody who's a skeptic still to tell me that they can fill their gas tank for $1.87 for the full tank, because I can. You can do something called preconditioning, which sounds like a nice luxury, right? Preconditioning, oh, get into a nice warm car or whatever in the winter. But what that really means is that you don't have to scrape the windshield anymore. And we learned this the hard way, well, by accident. So our first EV we bought in March, May, kind of springtime. And so I went in the car, I was playing with, it was a used EV, so I was learning the car. And so I go into climate settings, and I see this preconditioning thing. I'm like, ooh, what's that? And I turn it on, and I'm like, yes, I work from Monday to Friday. I leave the house at 8, and I set up all the times. And then I completely forgot I did that. And so fast forward to November, and I wake up to the sound of my neighbor's car idling in the driveway, making all kinds of noise. And I hear this scraping, and I'm like, oh my God, it's freezing rain overnight. No, I'm not ready for this. So I put on my coat. I'm still in like my boxer shorts and everything. Put on my boots, go outside. My wife's like, where are you going? I'm like, I gotta go scrape the windshield, right? It sounds like it's gonna be brutal. And so I get all dressed up. I go outside, and I look at the car, and it's completely defrosted. And I was like, well, that's neat. So I go back inside, and my wife's like, what's wrong? Why aren't you scraping the car? I'm like, I don't have to. She's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, I set up like the climate timer thing, and like it's preconditioned, so now like the windshield's clean. I don't have to scrape. She's like, what, we don't have to scrape anymore? She's like, that's it. We live in the future. This is amazing. Like, sold, right? She's like, how come nobody talks about this? This is the best part of an EV. You don't have to scrape the windshield. So there you go. Lower maintenance costs. We'll talk about that on the next section. So this is car maintenance. So electric cars, so there's a rule in like engineering, mechanical things where simple equals reliable. Like the more simple it is, the more reliable it tends to be. So if that holds true, which it usually does, EVs are very reliable because they're mechanically much simpler. You have 10 times fewer moving parts in an EV than in a gas car, right? So electric cars just don't have things that typically go wrong in a fossil car, right? We don't have exhaust systems. There's no belts, right? There's no timing belts or accessory belts or things that squeak when you turn it on in the cold, right? There's no oil. There's no changes of oil. You don't need to change any oil. That's not a thing. There are no gears, as I mentioned. There's no transmission. It's a transaxle usually, so it's mounted right, attached to the wheels. Direct drive. There's no catalytic converters for somebody to come by in the night and try and cut out of the back of your car. There are no cylinder head gaskets, no alternators, no starter. I'm just trying to think of all the things that went wrong on my Golf when I bought it used. And I'm like, none of that exists in an electric car. So buying a used electric car is a much better experience, trust me, than buying a used gas car because there's none of this stuff that breaks in an EV. Now there's still like suspension parts and windshield wipers and all that stuff, right? So if you like hit a huge pothole and rip a wheel off, then yes, you're still gonna have to replace your suspension. But as far as engine stuff goes, the expensive stuff, right, when you have to get a new transmission, or you grind your gears too much and now your clutch doesn't work, like that doesn't exist in an EV, right? That's not a thing. Next slide. So the way an EV is built, and I'm getting a little technical, I know, so bear with me, but this is an EV platform, electric car platform. So essentially what you see here in the middle is the big silver box. That's the battery pack. So the batteries make up the floor of the car typically. And they're armor plated and weatherproof, so you can drive through a lake and they're fine. And actually there's a lot of videos on YouTube, if you care, of like Teslas and other EVs driving through flooded streets, because they won't drown, right? An electric car doesn't need air to breathe to work, so you can drive through a giant puddle and it's just gonna keep going because it's not like a gas car that needs to breathe so that when you go through a puddle it chokes. EVs don't have that. So these batteries are waterproof and armored, so if you hit a rock, it's not the end of the world. They have the motors. So the motor is that cylindrical thing on the front there at the top left. There's a little cylinder. That's the electric motor, the size of like a watermelon normally. You can have them wherever you want on the car. So some cars have one on the front, some cars have one on the back axle if you want front wheel drive or rear. Some, like this one, have it on the front and the rear, so there's all-wheel drive. And some cars, like Rivian's, have 4 of them. So you have one for each wheel, which means you can do cool things like a tank turn where the car just sort of spins in place, sort of like an Argo can do. So electric cars can do that because there's no transmission, right? You don't have to worry about a prop shaft or anything. You can have all-wheel drive. And what that means is that this platform is extremely flexible. So you can put a pickup truck on there, you can put a hatchback, you can put whatever you want. Any shape of car can fit on that skateboard, and they call it a skateboard. So this is how an EV platform looks. But there's not a lot of like maintenance requirements there, right? So yeah, next slide, please. So let's get into a bit of charging. So we've talked about the basics of an EV. So there's 3 levels of charging. So if we go to the next slide, I'll talk about level 1 and 2. So level 1 and 2 is a AC current. That's what you have in the walls of your house. Level 1 is literally a wall outlet, right? It's a 110 outlet. So if you are stuck in the middle of nowhere, just look for a light somewhere and you can charge your car, right? So anywhere there's electricity, the EV does not care. As long as you can plug in, it'll charge. Level 2 is a 240 outlet. That is like a dryer plug typically. An electric car on level 2 uses about as much energy as a hot water tank. So if you're like, oh, my panel won't fit any, yeah, if you can have a water tank, then you can have an EV. Those are more dedicated EV chargers, and this is mine. This is mounted on the outside of my house on the front wall next to the garage. They run you between $480 and $1,800 if you want all the crazy bells and whistles. A decent one looking around $700 for the charger itself. And this is the kind of thing, it's an appliance. You buy it once, you attach it to your house, and that's it. You're done. You don't have to ever buy one again unless it breaks, which it probably won't. And it'll work for every car going forward. Any EV can use any charger. They're all interchangeable. And I'll get into the plug shapes in a second because this is changing, but this is the current standard J1772. So basically every EV that isn't a Tesla has this connector right now. And the total install for a level 2 charger is about $2,000, and you do that once and then you're done, and so your next car will use the same charger. Chargers are very mechanically simple. They're basically just a fancy GFI, if you know what that is. It's just a ground fault interrupt. It's basically a fancy switch. There's not really mechanically anything in them. If you open it up, it's mostly empty space. There's like a circuit board that makes sure that everything's safe, and then that's it. So we usually get a few questions about filling up at home, right? How often should you charge? You charge as much as you want. You can wake up every day with a full tank. I am lazy, and so I only fill up when I get down to like 20% on the battery. So that's like once a week for me. So realistically, if you want to get an idea, you can charge about as often as you buy gas right now. So we used to buy gas about once a week, and so now we charge once a week. But you can charge every day if you want. It doesn't really matter. Is charging in bad weather safe? Yes. That's the whole point of the EVSE, right? It makes sure that there's no shorts, there's no, like, if you're standing in water and you plug in, it makes sure there won't be any stray electricity to zap you, right? That's the whole point of it. So yes, you can absolutely charge in bad weather, no problem there. That's why it exists. How much should you charge? So this is an interesting question. The general rule is up to 80% for most days. You can charge to 100 whenever you want, but generally you want to keep it to 80 or below. So between 20 and 80 is sort of the normal range where you want to keep your car. If you're going on a road trip, by all means charge to 100. In fact, a lot of cars recommend you charge to 100 once in a while at least, so they balance the battery pack. But daily needs, 80% is plenty. That's 400 kilometers, which you're probably not going to use in a given day. And how much does it cost? Like I said, $2 for me, but up to $10 normally, depending on your car and your electricity rates and all that. and how much you drive. Most of the time, on a level 1, it'll take you a few days to charge your car. So it's good for like if you're going to somebody's cottage for a long weekend or whatever, you plug in when you get there, and then by the time you're ready to go, you're good. A level 2 will do it overnight. Any car will be charged fully overnight, so you don't really have to worry about it. You get home, plug it in like you do with your phone, and in the morning you're good to go. Next slide. So I mentioned that the charger plug are changing soon. The new charging plug is called NACS, or J3400. This is a new SAE standard that everyone's agreed to. It used to be called the Tesla connector, but now it's J3400. And as a result, every car starting next year that you will buy new will come with this plug. So every single car in North America will have the exact same connector, and it'll be glorious for those people. For everyone else, all the peasants like me that have an old legacy EV, we just need adapters. It's not a big deal. That's an example of an adapter up there. That's another adapter. So there's going to be adapters going forward for everybody. So if you have a NACS car, you're going to need adapters to use the legacy infrastructure. And if you have a legacy car, you're going to need an adapter to get the NACS infrastructure. So it's not a big deal. It's literally just a plug that changes the shape of the plug. It's cool. It's a lot more elegant. This is a much better design than the current NACS CCS, or sorry, J1772 or CCS, which I'll get into. You'll see why on the next slide. But this connector is a lot more elegant. It does both AC and DC charging. It's smaller, it's lighter, it's easier to use. It tends to be more reliable for some reason. So every non-Tesla and every Tesla will use this plug starting next year, which is great. Next slide. Filling up away from home. So I talked about filling up at home, level 1 and 2. Level 3 is the last level. You've leveled up all the way to the top. This is DC fast charging or supercharging if you're in the Tesla world. This is what you use on road trips, and you can think of these more like a gas station where you hit it and then you keep going. They take anywhere from a few minutes to just under an hour. You'll hear stories of people charging for like 8 hours. That's complete nonsense. The longest an EV will take on a fast charger like this is about an hour. And that's for the older legacy cars. The newer cars, like mine, charge in 15 minutes or less, which can be annoying, actually. Because when I first got my car, the first thing I did is I called up a buddy, and I said, hey, you want to go on a 1,000-kilometer road trip with me? And he's like, in your new car, didn't you get it last week? I'm like, yeah. There's a rain barrel. There's a barrel I need to go buy down at Lake Simcoe because I want to make a barbecue smoker out of it. And they have one in Lake Simcoe. And he's like, okay, let's go. And so I drove down to Lake Simcoe and back in one day, so 1,000 kilometers total round trip. And when we hit the first fast charger, it was down in Napanee, and we wanted lunch, right? It was lunchtime. And so I plug in, and we go get lunch at A&W, and we're sitting down. I haven't even taken a bite out of my burger yet, and my phone's like, your car's ready. And I'm like, okay, that was unexpected. Right, I've heard horror stories that it takes forever to charge a car, right? So, yeah, it usually takes less time to charge your car than it does for you to like go to the washroom and get a snack, right? So on the road charging is fast. It's convenient because usually after 4 or 5 hours of driving, you want to go to the washroom or something anyway, right? It is more expensive than home charging, so you're looking at about half the cost of a tank of gas. So it's still cheaper than a tank of gas, but it's getting, like, in the EV world, it's like, well, I can charge my car for $2 at home. Now it costs like $20, right? So that's not the end of the world. The biggest takeaway is that there's different speeds of chargers. So kind of like how fuel pumps have, like, you know, I don't even remember fuel grades. Regular, Supreme, and then the other one. There's like 3, right? It's been so long. EV chargers have different speed ratings, and they're measured in kilowatts, right? Kilowatts is a unit of power. And so they range from 50, which is the slow ones, to 350, which are much faster. My car can take up to 350, so that's why I can get my like 10-minute, supercharged hit. But if you're at a 50, it takes a bit longer. And some cars can only do 50, and so there's a bit of a spectrum out there. But they're all technically fast chargers, and so when you're buying an EV, kind of keep that in mind. Like if you do a lot of road tripping, look for a bigger kilowatt number on the charging speed side. But if you don't care that much, then 50 is plenty, it's fine. So now we're going to get into some myths. So I saw this on my Facebook feed. I don't know if you guys are on Facebook or whatever, social media. But there's stuff like this going around all the time. And so you look at this hole in the ground, it looks horrific, right? It's like, oh my God. And they're saying, well, this is a lithium mine for electric car batteries. Oh my, geez. And then look at this oil sands site. Well, it's just like it's surrounded by forest and it looks very green. And like, tell me how your electric car is better for the environment. Okay, I will. Next arrow. So this is false. It'll shock you to know. I mean, Saskatchewan Proud, they're well renowned as an academic source, right? Yeah, so this is false. So if we hit one more. So this is what actually a tar sands site looks like. I can't help but notice there's a distinct lack of trees in this picture. But this is Fort McMurray in northern Alberta. It's a Suncor site, so Petrocan for you, I think. Next. And this is what an actual lithium mine looks like. The other one was actually a copper mine in Australia. So it wasn't even a lithium mine, it was copper. So completely wrong metal. But if you want to rip out all the electrical wires in your house, then maybe, like if you don't like that mine, then, you know, there's some other issues there. So this is in the Atacama Desert. So lithium is actually a salt. We can actually mine the ocean for lithium if we wanted to, but right now it's a little tricky to do. So we do it from concentrated regions like the salt plains in the Atacama Desert. And yeah, I mean, it's not great for the planet, mining. If you get the next slide, there we go. So yeah, mining is not great for Earth, right? In any kind. If mining is your concern, then you definitely want to go EVs, and I'll tell you why. EVs do require a bit more minerals than a gas car to build, right? That's true. I will give them that. But a gas car needs a lot more minerals to exist than an EV. And what I mean by that is that an EV requires about 160 kilograms more mined minerals to make the EV than compared to a similar gas car. But your gas car doesn't work unless you have gasoline, right? And the average gas car consumes 17,000 liters of gasoline in its lifetime. And like, I'm not a math magician, but 17,000 liters is a big number compared to 160. So it's basically 100 times more mined minerals go into the use of a gas car than an EV, which means if mining is your bugbear, that's the hill you want to die on, and justifiably so, like mining is not great, there's a lot of improvement there we can do. But if you want to reduce mining as much as possible, then stop mining oil, right? Because when you mine oil from a tar sand like that, what do we do with it? We just burn it, right? It's gone. When you mine lithium, right? Lithium's a metal, right? Any like aluminum, copper, lithium, those are all metals. Metals can be recycled. So we can indefinitely recycle the batteries, and I'll get into that in a little bit later. But battery minerals are fully recyclable, fossil fuels are not. That's the take-home message here. So if you want to reduce mining by 99% on Earth, then we need to electrify as quickly as possible. Extra greenhouse gases are created making an EV compared to a fossil car when they're built. But because a fossil car requires gasoline to run and pollutes the entire time it exists, that difference is made up in about 20,000 kilometers, or about 2 years for the average driver. If you drive more, then obviously it's going to be less time. So my car has now more than doubled that. It's got 40,000 on it. So I've more than made up for the CO2 emitted making my EV. And so I'm in the green now. The sources are there. If you don't believe me, you can take a screenshot. This presentation will be up somewhere as well. Next slide, please. All right, so batteries will need replacing, right? So, okay, I've heard this a lot. Oh, man, we'll have to replace these batteries after 8 years. Terrible. Why buy a disposable car? That, as all good myths, comes with a kernel of truth, right? The 8-year thing came from Toyota hybrids, the Prius specifically, with the nickel metal, cobalt or manganese, whatever the battery chemistry was that I can't remember right now that I talked about earlier. Those batteries tend to wear out after about 8 years, and you need to replace them. But EV batteries don't do that, right? They're completely different chemistry. It's a more modern chemistry. They're engineered to last the life of the vehicle. The warranty on every EV in Canada, and actually the US as well, so North America wide, is 8 years or 160,000 kilometers, right? And that's just the warranty. So if anything happens to your car in the first 8 years, it's covered. So if your battery has a manufacturing defect, they will just replace it, done, no problem. You won't pay a dime. You should not expect to have to ever replace the battery at your own expense during the life of the vehicle. They're engineered to last for the life of the vehicle, which they typically aim to be about 15 to 20 years. Not a lot of 20-year-old cars driving around, I noticed. So that seems about right. Usually what happens, especially in our climate here with the salt that we put on, I swear the city of Ottawa is trying to convert the Ottawa River into a salt waterway because the amount of salt they put on the roads is crazy. So what will happen here, especially, is that the car will probably rust around the battery pack, which means you'll have this perfectly fine battery, but then your wheels are falling off and the doors are going to like have holes in them. So what do? I'll get into that in a sec. Batteries can be recycled. They already are being recycled. There's a company in Kingston. It's actually a global company, but they have a facility in Kingston. It's called Li-Cycle. There's a few others. Redwood Materials is another one. They take EV batteries and they recycle them, and they're getting 95% yield. And what that means is that when they get this battery, they get 95% of the materials out of that battery and put it back into the supply chain. And the 5% they don't get are like the plastic clips and stuff. Because I learned this last year that plastic is not actually recyclable. That has been a thing that the oil industry has gaslit us for the past, since I was a kid. Plastic is not recyclable. It's not a thing. They just throw it out into the landfill. You put it in the blue box and it goes into the landfill. So it's crazy. 2% of all plastic has ever been recycled. That's it. Anyway, I digress. There are older Teslas, right? Teslas have been around for almost 15 years now. Some of them are over 500,000, 600,000 kilometers. There's a guy in Australia. His Tesla has 666,000 kilometers on the original battery, right? And it's fine. He's a taxi driver. He's still using the same car. It's crazy. So these batteries last a long time. And when the car dies, next slide. There are secondary use applications. So on the left there, that's in Lancaster, California. And that one is it's called the B2U SEP-V Sierra. It's a very cool name. It uses 1,300 Nissan Leaf battery packs, providing the California grid with 25 megawatt hours of capacity. So these kind of facilities replace peaker plants, right? The gas peaker plants that Doug Ford really loves. These will replace them and they don't emit. These are actually better than a fossil peaker plant because these can dispatch electricity instantaneously. We're talking microseconds. Whereas a gas peaker plant has to wait for the turbine to spool up first, right? So there's a bit of a time lag. So if they need power, they can fire up the peaker plant, but it takes a couple minutes to get up to speed and temperature, right? Whereas a battery pack like this, instant, right? And Australia has a few of these, and they found that it actually helped grid stability because what happened is they had I think it was a gas peaker plant actually, and it had a catastrophic mechanical failure during peak time, right? So worst case scenario, something went bang and the thing went offline instantaneously, and their Tesla Megapacks clicked on and they didn't even notice that there was an issue until the alarms went off for the peaker plant, and they were like, well, where's the power coming from? Oh, the Megapacks. Look at that. They just kicked right in, right? So that adds thing. This is Northland Power. It's a Oneida BESS, or Battery Energy Storage System. It's in Jarvis, Ontario, so if you're wanting to go visit it, it's southern Ontario, just past Toronto, around the little Gordon Horseshoe there at the bottom. It's 1,000 megawatt hours that they're building. It'll come online next year. This is what it's going to look like. Those shipping containers all have Tesla battery packs in them, and they're using lithium iron phosphate batteries, which is the new hotness. They're cheaper, and they're not flammable, so you could drive spikes through them and they won't do anything. They'll just stop working. And so this is coming onto the Ontario grid next year, and there's going to be one around, there's a few of them that they want to put in around Ottawa too. These are silent. They don't emit anything. There's no exhaust or anything. They operate instantaneously. They last for decades. They're fantastic, cool things. So this is what you can use old EV batteries for. And so when you send your battery to a recycler, more likely than not, if it's a decent battery, they'll put it into a shipping container like that and wire it up to be a stationary storage for a building, or in this case, a wind farm. Or they can replace a diesel generator or a gas peaker plant. The problem right now is that there's not a lot of feedstock for old batteries, right? All of the old EV batteries that were built are still in the cars they were built for, right? So the problem that the recyclers are having right now is that they don't have enough feedstock to supply, and the demand for batteries is so high that we still have to mine. But in the future, there will come a time where we've mined enough materials to make all the batteries we ever want, and it'll be a circular economy. We won't have to mine that anymore, right? Next slide, please. At least that's the idea. So battery recycling, right? I've already talked about this. So this is Li-Cycle. This is the pictures from them. So they take a bunch of batteries, they break them up into the individual cells. And then they have a big sorting machine. It makes this black stuff here, and that's the stuff that's the good stuff. That's the black gold that battery people like. And then that goes into new battery packs. And so as I said, 95% of all the materials can be recovered. They provide large-scale recycling. Yeah, most of the batteries ever produced are still in the cars. And the limits they're not technical, they're not technological. We have all the technology. It's already cost-effective to do this, right? It's cheaper to use recycled materials than new dug out of the ground materials. It's just there's not enough recycled materials in the system to meet demand. So they're making profit. So myth 3, EVs are heavy and they destroy roads and parking garages. It's a new one that came out last year that I got a kick out of. They're like, parking garages, really? And then I went to find if a single parking garage has ever collapsed because of an EV, and it turns out, no, not a single piece of infrastructure has ever collapsed because of a heavy electric car. And I think I know why, right? So we have some comparisons here. Up at the top, that's a Tesla Model 3, right? And the car that the Model 3 directly competes with is the BMW M3, or the 3 Series. So those two are direct competitors. They're interchangeable. They benchmark each other on performance, and they're the same size, and they hit the same market, and they have the same price. And so these two cars are basically interchangeable, but one's an electric and one's a gas car. And would you look at that? The gas car actually comes out a little heavier. Weird. Model Y, okay? So the Model Y competes directly with the BMW X3. So these are both around, $60,000 cars. They're both SUVs. And look at that, they're almost the same weight. And then the gas Ford F-150. Well, I'm not a mathematician again, but I think 6,000 is heavier than 4,000, right? Weird. And yet, it's only in the context of electric cars that people complain or care about the weight of the car, right? But it turns out like EVs don't necessarily weigh more than the gas cars that they're replacing. And yes, you can have heavy electric cars. Like the Hummer EV is probably the heaviest car you can buy. And yeah, of course, it's a Hummer, right? Like even the gas Hummer is not exactly a light vehicle, right? So yeah, you can cherry pick, an EV and say, well, look, EVs are heavier because I found this Hummer. It's like, cool, well, I found a semi-truck, but that doesn't really make the argument, right? It's like you're comparing apples to oranges here. And there aren't that many Hummers because also, if you're worried about the road infrastructure and that EV owners should pay more to maintain the roads because their cars are heavier, okay, well, if weight is the issue then I guess all the commercial trucking operations should pay even more because their trucks can get into like the tens of thousands of pounds, right? So EVs don't have enough range, right? So I alluded to this earlier about a tank of gas for a modern EV, right? So these are just a selection of current EVs that are out or coming out very soon. The top one is actually a pickup truck, right? The Silverado. That's the electric version of the Silverado. It gets 724 kilometers real world, right? So there's a YouTuber that got his hands on one and was like, I'm going to see if Chevy's claims are true. So I'm going to drive this until it dies. And yeah, he drove for an 8-hour day, and he got more than 724 kilometers out of it, but 724 is what they're rated for. He got like 760 out of it, and he's like, okay, and it was on the highway, like he wasn't babying, he wanted it to die. And so, yeah, so that's a thing. Model S, Model 3, right, these are pretty common. Ioniq 6, my car, the Ioniq 5 is at the bottom there, 480, and I routinely get 500 out of it, so a lot of these numbers are sort of the pessimistic end. 480 is probably what I get in the winter, and then in the summer it's more like 500 and something. So yeah, that's enough range, I'd say, for pretty much everybody, right? A tank of gas, right? They all sort of aim for around 500 kilometers, and so EVs are doing the same thing. You could make an EV that goes like 1,000 kilometers if you wanted, but why, right? You don't need to carry around all that extra weight. There's nowhere to charge. If only we had hydrogen and we could go to Vancouver to charge at that one spot. But yeah, so this is, as you might recognize, Eastern Ontario, right? So Toronto's that clump over there, Montreal over there. So this is sort of where people typically, when we talk to them, this is where they want to go. And so when you look at this map, you're like, okay, that's not a bad amount of charging, right? It's pretty cool. But keep in mind, you're going to start the day at your house probably, right? And you're going to start, if you're going on a road trip and you know you're doing it, you're going to start with a full charge, right? So 500 kilometers. So what chargers do you actually care about? You don't care about the ones around Ottawa, right? I mean, there's a bunch, but really the chargers you care about are sort of down towards Toronto or Quebec, Montreal, right? So fast chargers, like people make a lot of complaints about there's not enough fast chargers around. There are, it's just they're on the highways, and if you're not used to looking for them, you're not going to see them, right? They don't have giant 100-foot signs saying fast charge here, right? And the reason they don't is because they're all in the apps and they're all in the cars, right? The cars know where the chargers are. They don't need to advertise on the side of a highway that there's a charger here, at least not yet. Maybe that'll come in the future, but for now, if you're not, it's street furniture, you're just not going to see them. There's chargers in this parking lot that I bet a lot of people didn't even notice, right? And so, yeah, there's plenty of places to charge. They're all along all the highways. And yeah, we have good coverage. You can go coast to coast on EV alone, and a lot of people have. There's a lot of people who've done cross-country road trips all the way to Vancouver from here or up to Newfoundland, right? There's chargers wherever you need them, both Tesla and non-Tesla. And as of next year, everyone will be able to use the Tesla network, so that argument goes away as well. So yeah, lots of chargers. And these are just fast chargers, not even the slow ones. All right, and I just talked to a gentleman in the parking lot about this. So EVs just shift the pollution from the car tailpipe to the power plant, right? And we still use coal, and people will bang on the table. Oh yeah, we're using coal. There's an app called GridWatch. It's for Ontario. You can look it up if you like. It basically gives you a real-time or near real-time, I think they update every hour, of what the grid is producing and consuming and the type of energy that is being produced. And what you'll see here is that 47% of the energy in Ontario is nuclear. So that's about half. Another quarter is hydro, which is a hint as to why we call it hydro in Canada. Yes, there's gas, and that number has been growing in recent years because of government policies. Wind and solar, and then a little bit of biofuel in there. Our largest source is nuclear, has been for decades, right? There is no coal on that list, and the reason is because we shut down our coal plants a decade and a half ago now. We haven't had coal on the Ontario grid in forever. Gas used to be around 5%, but yeah, government policies have been, paid for by Enbridge, I guess. Wind and solar are the cheapest though, so if anybody wants to build new energy, chances are they're looking at building wind and solar because that is the cheapest way to get online quickly with electricity production. Until recently, Ontario has been restricting the amount of wind that can be added to the grid, but that's gone away now, so we should start seeing a lot more wind and solar added, which will hopefully bring that gas number down significantly. By 2050, half or over half of our generation will be from hydro, and that's Canada-wide. 20% almost will be from wind, and then nuclear and everything else will make up the balance. But yeah, there's a reason we call our electricity companies in Ontario hydro, right? Because dams make most of the energy, and that's clean. And say what you want about nuclear, it doesn't emit CO2, and if climate change is a thing, then nuclear is fine. It's expensive, so building new nuclear is probably not a good idea, but existing nuclear is fine. The grid can't handle everyone switching, oh my God, right? We hear this a lot. I mentioned it earlier, a typical EV uses about as much energy as a hot water tank. So this argument that the grid can't handle everyone switching to EVs makes about as much sense as the grid can't handle everyone switching to hot water, right? Which we've already done. Like we already did that switch decades ago. So we're just doing it again. Hydro companies are not dumb. They're well aware that EVs are coming in increasingly large numbers. They're already planning on building the capacity they need. This chart here, actually it's from the Canada Energy Regulator. It shows you the planned production and build out of energy. And you'll see the yellow line up there, that's solar, right? And then there's wind is the one right below the yellow. And then the coal one, this is coal, right? Gone, right? Because there are still a couple provinces that use coal, but they're planning on phasing it out because coal is expensive. And then you'll see the hydro, sort of the half, the big blue section there. So according to StatCan, even when 10 million EVs are added to the grid, which is about half of the cars currently on the road in Canada, demand for electricity is only going to increase between 5 and 10%, right, from 2022 levels. right? 5 and 10% is not a huge jump in demand, right? We did 5%, we did a 6% demand increase in 1987, and the grid didn't collapse. 2007, we added 4.2% generation to the grid. Again, nobody noticed, right? So when we're talking about replacing half of the cars on the road today, right, the grid will be fine. In fact, we can add 25% more EVs to the road tonight, and we wouldn't even have to generate more electricity than already exists, right? Like, that's an overnight change. And the thing is, it takes, like, people don't buy cars like they buy phones, right? They buy cars every 10, 15 years maybe, right? So the replacement rate's gonna take a while. It's gonna take a few years, a few decades probably, to switch over the fleet. So the grids have plenty of time to adjust to demand changes as more and more people get electric cars. EVs don't work in the cold. Oh, geez, well, that's my car in front of my house. Looks pretty cold, and look at that snowbank, eh? Yeah. They do work in the cold because I have one, and it works in the cold. Heat pumps. So a lot of EVs have heat pumps. Heat pumps are great for the house. They're also good for the car. What it means in real terms is that you don't have to wait for the engine to warm up. You just get heat in the car, right? So in the before times when I commuted to work in my Golf, I would pull into the office 25 kilometers away from the house, and that's when it decided to start putting heat into the cabin. I'd get all the way to work, like 15, 20-minute drive, and then I get the heat, right? In my EV, I get heat by the end of the block, right, coming out of the air vents, because heat pumps are magical, and I can't talk enough about heat pumps. Preconditioning, I already talked about, right? No more windshield scraping. You can idle for as long as you want. There was a story in the news a few years ago about people getting stuck on some American highway near Washington or whatever, and like, oh, it was a snowstorm and they got stranded. And what about the poor EV owners? I'm like, I'd worry about the gas car people, because if you're in a gas car and you get stuck in a snowstorm right on the highway, you have a choice to make. You can either run the engine and risk dying of carbon monoxide poisoning and have heat, or you can turn off the engine and not suffocate, but then freeze to death, right? That's your Sophie's choice. Whereas an EV, you can leave it running. It'll run for days, literally days. Probably, what does it say? Yeah, days. I calculated my car will run for 6 days at idle, just making heat for the cabin before the battery finally runs out, right? So 6 days in a snowbank is much longer than I'd ever want to spend. Most of the time you're looking at a few hours. But I would sit there in nice warm comfort. I'd be thirsty and hungry, but I'd be warm. And I didn't suffocate from CO2. So that's great, or carbon monoxide. So that's a good thing about EVs. Many have all-wheel drive, low centers of mass, so they handle very well in the snow. A lot of them are rear-wheel drive, which people are like, well, rear-wheel drive cars are bad, right? Because they're not good in the Canadian snow. That's a gas car thing. The reason that rear-wheel drive cars in Canada weren't traditionally good in the snow is because you have a big heavy engine up front and you're sending power to the unburdened axle in the back, right? And so you fishtail everywhere. If you remember the skateboard platform, EVs have an even weight distribution, right? And so rear-wheel drive is actually really good in the snow, because what happens when you accelerate is it pushes the weight to the back wheels, and the weight's already distributed pretty evenly. So you get actually a bit more weight on the rear tires, which means they're better traction. So in an EV, rear wheel is actually pretty good. But you can get all-wheel drive too, no problem. EV fires, they always catch fire. Oh man, yep, all these EV fires, they always make the news when they catch fire, right? I mean, that's a thing. But literally yesterday I was driving somewhere and I heard on the radio that a dump truck was on fire. And it was just like on the news somewhere out on Highway 7, there was a dump truck on fire, and the person I was with was like, hey, car fire. I'm like, yeah, and it's not an EV, it's a diesel truck, right? Because it turns out gas and hybrid cars catch fire way more frequently than EVs. The reason EVs get on the news when they catch fire is because it's rare, right? There are literally gas car fires in Ottawa pretty much on a weekly basis. You just don't hear about them because the most you might hear is that there's a stalled car on the 417 somewhere, right? It might be on fire, but they don't mention that part. They just say that the car is stalled. And the reason is pretty simple. Gas cars have a huge quantity of highly flammable liquids on board. Hybrids have the best of both worlds. They have not only a bunch of flammable liquid, but they also have electronics next to the flammable liquids. So That might explain why their numbers are higher. But this is from an insurance company, right? So this data, I'm not making it up. This is from an insurance company. And if anybody has a dog in this fight, it's the insurance companies. And they did a study, and they found per 100,000 vehicles, 25 of them were electric that caught fire, but 1,500 gas cars caught fire, and then even more hybrids, right? I talked to a fireman who came by to check our smoke detectors, because me being a nerd from EVCO, I'm like, talk to me about electric car fires. I'm like, what do you know as a fireman? And he's like, I've never seen one in Ottawa. They've never had one. The Ottawa Fire Department has never dealt with an EV fire in Ottawa. They got training on it. He's like, I got trained. I know what to cut. I know how to put it out. And I know all this other stuff. But we've never seen one. I'm like, what about gas car fires? He's like, oh yeah, we have those every week. He's like, usually there's like 2. And I was like, oh, okay, well, there you go. So yeah, so that's pretty much dead, that myth. Okay, and then the most recent myth, EV sales are in decline. I'm sure you've heard the news talk about this like it's a fact, like EV sales are in decline, nobody wants these things, it's a fad, but it's not true. And I'll tell you why. So combustion cars have been on the decline since 2017, right? So if you look at the chart on the left, right, that's Bloomberg. So the blue is combustion cars, those are gas cars, diesel. Plug-in hybrids are a little black slice there, and then battery electric, of course, are the green. So we had the 2020 COVID hit, right, which didn't help anybody. But then look what happens after 2021 and onwards, right? So we've got gas cars are pretty much flat. So they peaked in 2017 and then have sort of stabilized. All of the growth in the car industry has come from plug-in vehicles, right? So we're almost back to pre-pandemic levels as far as overall car sales. But all of those cars being sold now are electric, all the new ones. This is our projection. I sort of moonlight, well, actually I don't, it's my day job. I do statistics for a living, and this is not sanctioned by my employer. But I did this just as a fun thing, because I was curious. So back in 2017, when I got my first EV, I was like, I wonder when we'll see all the new cars being electric, right? And so I got some numbers from StatCan, and I found a model on the internet that this is called a adoption curve, right? It's a standard function. It's a model. It's like there's a spreadsheet. You can plug in stuff and it spits it out. I can get really into the nerdy stuff if you want about how this chart works, but basically this holds true for everything from microwaves to color TVs to cell phones. Everything follows this curve, right? Which makes things hard to predict because it's not linear, right, as you can see. It's exponential growth and then logarithmic decay at the top, right? And it's just sort of, it's a stats thing. But basically, I plotted this curve in 2017, and it plotted the red line. And I was like, hey, that's really neat. How close was I wonder? So I kept that original model, like I saved it, and I made it its own little tab in Excel. And then ever since, I've been plugging in the real world data in blue to see how close my model went to the real world. And as you can see, the real world actually did a little bit better than my model's a little pessimistic. So last year, 1 in 10 cars sold in Canada were plug-ins. This year, 15%. Next year, 20%. And we're on the exponential part of the curve. So in just a few short years, more than half of all new cars sold in Canada will have a plug on them, right? Now, a lot of people aren't really, they don't know this is coming yet. The energy companies know this is coming. This is why you're hearing a lot of misinformation out there, is because the oil industry and the legacy gas car companies, Toyota, know that this is a thing, right? This is math. They have economists too, and they can predict the same exact thing I did. And they can see the writing on the wall. And so they are doing everything they can to flatten this curve as much as they can so that they don't go out of business. But this is statistics. This is how it works. It's a probability thing. I can get into it later. It's fine. And I think that's it.